It began on an otherwise unremarkable evening. Samuel Bell, a man in his late 30s with dark hair flecked prematurely with gray, sat alone in his cramped apartment. The room was dimly lit, a single lamp casting pools of orange light over dog-eared books and the remnants of past ambitions. He had just drifted into a restless sleep when the dream came, vivid, charged, unlike any he had ever experienced. He was 10 years old again, standing on the cracked sidewalk of his childhood neighborhood. The sun hung low, tinged with an amber glow that felt almost tangible. Every detail was precise, the distant rumble of a passing train, the musty scent of summer rain clinging to the air. Samuel knew he was dreaming, but this was different. He could feel the warmth on his skin, hear the chatter of his parents arguing from an open window. A wave of nostalgia swept through him, bittersweet and sharp. This was the day he had broken his arm after being dared by his older brother, Jason, to leap from the garage roof. He looked up, saw the rusted metal edge, and felt an urge, a compulsion, to change what would come next. He didn't know why, but he did. Turning, he walked away from the garage, a triumphant smile on his face as he heard Jason's voice calling, confused, behind him. When he woke up, a strange sensation settled over him. It was like waking from a deep sleep in a room he didn't recognize. The morning light seemed paler, and the apartment was quieter than usual. He shook it off, dismissing it as a remnant of the vivid dream. It wasn't until he glanced at the mantel, where a collection of family photos sat, that he noticed the first change. In a frame he'd seen countless times, there was now a photograph he didn't remember. A picture of his mother sitting alone on a park bench, her face tired, without the spark he remembered. He picked it up, fingers trembling. The memory attached to the picture flooded his mind. She had spent more time alone after that day, worrying about Jason's increasingly reckless behavior. Samuel staggered back, the frame slipping from his grasp and shattering on the floor. It was impossible, he told himself, but doubt had already taken root. That night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside, haunted by what he'd seen. The dreams came more frequently, like whispers from a world he couldn't resist. Each time, he ventured into them willingly, revisiting moments both significant and small, stopping a fight at school that had left him bruised for weeks, making a friend he'd once ignored, speaking up instead of staying silent. Each time he woke to subtle, disquieting changes. His walls painted a different color. A neighbor he'd known for years no longer recognized him. It was after the 5th time he altered a memory that he realized the implications were becoming more sinister. The air felt denser, a tangible tension lacing every interaction. Friends stopped calling. His boss at the accounting firm he worked at seemed to eye him with cold suspicion, as though seeing something Samuel couldn't fathom. His brother, Jason, once a distant but steady presence, had disappeared from his life altogether. A quick search through old emails confirmed it. There had been no messages exchanged in years. In this new present, they hadn't spoken since they were teenagers. Samuel's desperation grew. The changes were out of control, but the dreams kept calling him back, taunting him with opportunities to fix what had been ruined. Each night, the choice felt inevitable, like a fever he couldn't break. On the 10th night, Samuel found himself back in the family's old dining room, the wallpaper yellowed with age, the chairs squeaking beneath their weight. It was an evening he remembered vividly, the night his father announced he was leaving for good. A cold ball of dread settled in his stomach as he watched the scene unfold. His mother, eyes wet and angry, his father's back stiff as he walked to the door. The echo of a slammed door punctuating a silence that would haunt Samuel for years. This time he spoke. "Don't go," he said, his voice strangled. His father hesitated, a shadow of doubt flickering in his eyes before the door closed behind him anyway. Samuel woke up gasping, the echo of that slam reverberating in his mind. But the world that greeted him was a stranger's. The apartment was sparse, almost clinical. Gone were the familiar mismatched books, the framed photos of places he hadn't visited in years. There was only one picture now, stark and cold. His father's portrait, eyes hollow, beneath the headline of an obituary framed in silver. A shiver ran down Samuel's spine as he read, "Beloved father and respected educator dies under mysterious circumstances." The changes were no longer small. The butterfly effect, he realized with a sinking dread, had unfurled wings that spanned lives. His father hadn't left, he had stayed, only to descend into a spiral that ended in tragedy. Samuel tried to piece together the life he now occupied but found gaps everywhere. He had colleagues at work he couldn't recall meeting, routines that felt foreign. His body moved through them with a mechanic's detachment, while his mind raged against the impossibility of it all. By the 15th visit to memory lane, Samuel's dreams were no longer under his control. The moments he found himself reliving were twisted perversions of his memories. The garage roof from his childhood had changed. Now it loomed like the entrance to a maw. His brother's voice echoed, bitter and venomous. "Why didn't you listen? Why did you leave me there?" Samuel reached for him, only for Jason to vanish into the shadows, leaving behind only the scent of rust and something sour. In the waking world, the silence deepened. A storm gathered outside, relentless rain drumming against the window like nails. The city, usually alive with noise, felt muted. Neighbors passed him with eyes that didn't quite meet his own, and when Samuel spoke to them, they looked through him, as if to someone behind him, someone he couldn't see. Panic clawed at him. He had to set things right. But when he closed his eyes and slipped into the dreams again, it was different. The spaces between memories were filled with dark figures watching him from afar, their features shrouded in haze. When he ran, the streets narrowed, the buildings folded in on themselves like a labyrinth. He was trapped in his own mind, in the consequences of his tampering. He tried to go back to the very beginning, to the day he'd first found his way to memory lane, but the scene fractured like glass beneath a hammer's strike. Voices layered on top of each other, his brothers, his mother's, strangers' voices calling his name, accusing, demanding answers. Samuel fell to his knees, the darkness pressing in. When he woke, it was to an apartment stripped of even its most basic comforts. The city outside had grown silent, shrouded in a fog so thick that shapes barely moved within it. The phone lines were dead, the screen on his TV filled with static. The only sound was the rain and a faint tapping, like someone knocking on a distant door. He walked to the window and saw them, faces blurred as if smeared by an unseen hand, gathered at the edge of the street, staring up at him. He backed away, the breath catching in his chest as the tapping grew louder, now at his door. His father's voice, flat and empty, whispered through the keyhole. "You shouldn't have changed it, Samuel." Samuel sank to the floor, eyes wide and unfocused. The past had eaten the present. The future held only shadows, long and hungry. And in the distance, the figures waited, patient, for the man who had dared to tread down memory lane. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and leave a like. If you have an idea for a short, scary story, leave it in the comments below. See you at the next campfire.